what lessons are being learned by local agencies if we don't know what those lessons are? There is also nothing new in the statement today about the approach to monitoring. I would also ask the Cabinet Secretary what progress is being made by ministers in implementing the recommendations of the multi-agency report published in March, which asks ministers to amend guidance on MAPA quickly to ensure there is always a full analysis of risk. I also remain concerned about the impact on sex offender treatment of no longer having a national specialist unit for offenders at Peterhead. And I would ask the Cabinet Secretary, is it also not glaringly evident that any cuts to the budget for monitoring sex offenders would be entirely irresponsible? And given the success of the UK Government's child sex offender disclosure pilot, which resulted in at least 10 children being protected from potential abuse by sex offenders in the first 6 months of operation, when can we expect evaluation of the pilot programme in Tayside? The Cabinet Secretary is right to say that this programme does have cross-party support, and surely we should all hope it can be rolled out nationally as soon as possible as a key measure in protecting our children from abuse.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, there were a variety of matters, Deputy Presiding Officer. I will try to cover all of them that were raised. First of all, can I say that this was not my report. I think it may be perhaps helpful if Mr Baker could understand the background to this. This was a review, a significant case review carried out by Lothian and Borders Police, the City of Edinburgh Council and NHS Lothian. It was a matter that they did as a consequence of Neil Strachan's offending and being a registered sex offender. It was not anything that they were instructed to do by us. It was something that they did do as good practice. The review or the report, whatever we call it, is not mine. It is theirs. I have to say I have a lot of sympathy with a lot of the matters being made available to the public domain, but that would be a matter for them, because after all, within this report there are personal circumstances and details of victims, and therefore some matters are highly confidential. So, as I say, I think perhaps Mr Baker should understand the background of this review, that it is their document, that as an administration we would be more than happy for them to act as they see fit. If that is to publish it, that will be for them. I do think that they do face some considerable difficulties given the personal data involved, and that may be very difficult for those who have been the victims of these heinous offences. What I can say, and I don't think is any state secret, were that there were 4 recommendations, and they relate to police procedures around the investigation of domestic violence between lesbian or gay partners, consistency around the use of risk assessment tools by police and other agencies, operational improvements around sexual offences prevention order applications, and the identification of increased risk when offender admits to fantasising about children. There are no recommendations for the Scottish Government around legislation or guidance, although we will be happy to work with police, social work, health services through ACPOS to help disseminate any operational lessons. So as I should stress that this is a historic case, and each of the recommendations have been actioned locally by Lothian and Borders Police, the City of Edinburgh Council and NHS Review. They quite properly and should be congratulated for instigating this review, but it remains their review. It is a confidential document because of the personal data relating to the individuals involved. They may choose to publicise some matters, whether redacted or others. That will be a matter that I will support their judgment in whatever they choose to do, but it will be their decision. In terms of a variety of the other matters, clearly the Scottish Prison Service does have a great deal of expertise on dealing with sexual offences, and a great deal of pride is taken in Peterhead Prison, which is why indeed we are delighted as administration to ensure that a prison remains in Peterhead, so the valuable staff who serve there can still continue to serve locally. There are consequences under ECHR of making sure that we also provide assistance elsewhere, and we seek to do that as best we can, and these matters are being dealt with. I think with regard to MAPA, Mr Baker should realise that it is a relatively new matter, and one of the things that became clear from the Strachan review is that, sadly, MAPA was only kicking into gear when he was perpetrating his offences. Hopefully, as I say, as a result of MAPA, and I congratulate my predecessor for bringing these matters in, hopefully we close down some gaps that existed because MAPA did not affect Mr Strachan. So matters are learned, and we are always ongoing on these matters.
Bill Aitken. thank the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of the statement and add my own congratulations to the police, SCDEA and the Crown in achieving an extremely satisfactory result. As has already been mentioned, the accused Strachan had previous convictions and was in fact a registered sex offender, and the question which I would have to pose to the Cabinet Secretary is whether or not he feels that the present sex offender registration legislation is working as well as it can. Would there be any value in carrying out even further research into the desirability and workability of satellite tracking of such people who are on the sex offender register, and also a requirement for them to undertake lie detector tests where from time to time they disappear off the radar and are out with the public sight for some time, particularly where there has been an offence committed in that area? This chamber stands as one in trying to do everything possible to minimise this type of offence, and I think that we really do have to look at every possible way of reducing the risk to an absolute minimum.
Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank Bill Aitken both for the questions and indeed for the tenor in which he put them. I think I can give an assurance that this administration, as indeed with previous administrations, is ever vigilant, that we do recognise that to some extent it is a moving feast. There are matters that come upon us. The internet, for example, is a matter that has changed substantially since, for example, a lot of sexual offender legislation first came in. So we do have to be ever vigilant and ever watchful, and we do have to change, and that's why some matters are being addressed within the Criminal Justice and Licensing Bill. In terms of polygraph tests, we are aware that these are being trialled south of the border, and we are monitoring them. And I can give the member an assurance that if it is shown to be working, then we'll be more than happy to learn from any jurisdiction, and therefore we're watching with interest of what they do there. Because indeed, with regard to the Tayside pilot, that was predicated upon matters that were again being trialled, I think it was anecdotally, in Warwickshire. So again, we are happy to learn. If there are matters, and as I say, polygraph testing is one thing, satellite tracking is another. The difficulty with satellite tracking is it can tell you where an individual is. It doesn't necessarily tell you what that individual is doing. They can show where they are, but whether they are walking a child or walking their dog is not available to that. So technology has to be looked at, and where it's appropriate, we will bring it in, but it has limitations. You're quite correct to make the point that we have to make sure that the legislation is robust and fit for purpose. I do give an assurance that we're happy to review it, and I did hear that the member is anxious that the Justice Committee should matters, and we will fully support any recommendations that they make, and indeed be happy to contribute there. If there are matters, as I say, from this review that require legislation, we would do so. The review from the Strachan case seems to indicate that what has been brought in and is coming in with MAPA will add to matters, albeit it wasn't there at the time of being able to address Mr Strachan. We do recognise, though, that we're dealing with highly devious, manipulative people. We do have to be able to change to track the new tricks that they get up to. Equally, we have to recognise that sometimes, perhaps, we'll not be able to stop everything doing an evil deed. And that's why, as I say, in some instances, we have to recognise, rather than looking to blame somebody, in some instances, the only person to blame is those who have been convicted rightly. That's why I'm grateful for the comments you've made, both about the police and the other agencies involved in dealing with this matter.
Robert Brown.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for agreeing to the request for a statement and the advance copy of the statement, and add my support to the comments made by colleagues about the success of this particular operation. Now, the whole issue of the monitoring, control and treatment of sex offenders is an extremely tricky one, and the Government have the support of the whole Chamber in putting in place the most stringent and effective measures. Huge and complex challenges are also raised by the existence of paedophile rings like that in which Strachan and Rennie were involved. And of course we also had the case reported yesterday of Stephen Randall, which was not in the same category perhaps, but also worrying in respect of the fact that he'd also been on the sex offenders register. Now, very happily, the men convicted in these horrendous cases are now in jail, but can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he can comment on the likelihood of these men and other convicted sex offenders being on the sex offender treatment programme while in prison? Can he comment on the view expressed in the report of the former prison inspector Andrew McClellan that the number of spaces on that programme is too small, that it is not available to those who refuse to admit their guilt, and that in any event there is little proper statistical evidence as to its effectiveness? What assurance can he give us that sex offenders like these, rightly sentenced in some instances to lengthy prison sentences, will be less likely to offend on their eventual release, happily in one or two of these cases rather a long time away? And what's the current status of the evaluation of the sex offender treatment programme?
Secretary.
Well, I'm happy to provide further information in due course on the evaluation. I'm not able to provide that just immediately, but I welcome Mr Brown's comments regarding the importance of seeking to treat these people. And indeed, just anecdotally, I was speaking to Dr Mariette Tag at an event last night. And again,